What you know about rolling down in the deep? When your brain goes numb, you can call a man a freeze. When these people talk too much, put that shit in slow motion, yeah. I feel like an astronaut in the ocean, yeah. What you know about rolling down in the deep? When your brain goes numb, you can call a man a freeze. When these people talk too much, put that shit in slow motion, yeah. I feel like an astronaut in the ocean.
Hi, this is John Cullen. Welcome to another episode of Hypothetically Speaking. In this episode, I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Jason Goodman. And what I wanted to talk about in the show is a little bit of this backstory about who is George Webb and where did he come from? How did he come into Jason's life, Jason's world? And sort of the genesis of the show is that Crowdsource the Truth 8 was taken down by YouTube. And so I guess 8 is a magic number, right? Very, very fortuitous number, right? Very, right. In China, very special number. So I guess after you go from 120,000 subscribers on Crowdsource the Truth all the way through Crowdsource the Truth 8, at some point, it's like, I guess they take a 7th inning stretch in baseball. And in this game, we kind of waited till the 8th round. So with the loss of Crowdsource the Truth, and I guess many of your other channels, right? They took down the John Cullen Investigates channel and all that. So rather than just like jump into that part of the story, that's kind of the genesis of it. Like, to tell you the truth, what I was looking at the other day was your site on Odyssey. And there was all this stuff from way before I knew you, right? I mean, there was a ton of stuff there. And I didn't know any of that stuff. I was, living in Thailand, living the dream with the Russian model wife and, the whole deal. I didn't know what the hell you were up to. And then one day you send me an email and said, "Hey, I watched your Frank Muth video and, we should talk," right? So I didn't know any of this stuff with the Queen Tut and this one. And then I'm pulling up the stuff on Odyssey and I'm watching you and Joe Napoli in Vegas walking around in the Mandalay Bay together. And I'm looking at Joe Napoli and I'm like, I feel like I'm watching a Bourne Identity movie here. And like he's about to stick a knife in you and gut you in the freaking stairway. I mean, he looks so much the character from Central Casting. Yeah. I mean, Joe Napoli looks.
But had you not seen that video? With Joe
that's what I'm saying. I haven't seen any of this stuff. So I'm looking at you.
Wait, let me address some of what you're bringing up because it might confuse people. So first with the Odyssey channel, I was also surprised. Just the other day, I learned how much of the legacy content is there. And what has happened, I guess, and I don't even remember specifically doing this, but Odyssey has a button buried somewhere in here that says synchronize it with your YouTube channel. Because you see how it says that this is 7 years old. Yeah. This is one of the first videos I did, HRC voters in Trumpland. I went down to the movie premiere of Michael Moore's. He made some kind of documentary about, people voting for Trump.
Hang on,
and I went down there.
Which Michael Moore? Michael Moore.
The Fahrenheit, the fat guy.
Okay, so the filmmaker,
Fahrenheit
Michael
451,
Moore,
right, the famous filmmaker.
Right.
So these were all people who were waiting outside the IFC movie theater. I just figured, let me just go down there and interview people. Because when I approached this, I didn't say, "Ooh, I'm a journalist suddenly, and I'm going to go do this." I approached it with respect for the field. And in that, I mean, I had no training as a journalist, so I did not presume that I could just show up and be a journalist. I did think, well, I could ask people questions and just see what they say and engage them in conversation. And that was basically what I was doing here. But what seems to have occurred is that this, back up your YouTube channel button, I must have clicked it at some point when I created this Odyssey channel about 2 years ago. And so there's a lot of stuff from the original Jason Goodman YouTube channel. There was no Crowdsource the Truth 1 YouTube channel. There was a Jason Goodman YouTube channel. And people can see all that legacy stuff. You just go to odyssey.com/crowdsource the truth, click on this content tab, and then this little icon allows you to give it some filters and things like that. You just come over here and sort it by oldest first. It doesn't have all of the original Crowdsource the Truth videos because some of them got, strikes and things early on. And Odyssey doesn't, I don't know if it can't recognize 360 footage. That's interesting. Look at what it does. On YouTube, this is a virtual reality 3D video. So what we're seeing is left and right of two 360-degree videos jammed into a video frame there. And you see me here at the base holding the 3D VR camera. You can see it. This was so small. You can see my hand. This was competitive with a camera. I designed this, 3D printed it, took apart 4 GoPros and put on custom lenses to build this thing. It delivered better quality and could run longer than the camera developed by Google and the camera developed by Facebook. Those each involved like 30 cameras and a motorcycle battery, and you needed like all kinds of like a wheelbarrow to take it around. So we can't necessarily enjoy all of the legacy Crowdsource the Truth content, but most of it is there on Odyssey. And the great thing about Odyssey, John, is that people can also become members and sponsor the show. And the other great thing about Odyssey is that, like you and I, just as we're independent journalists, Odyssey is essentially like the independent replacement for YouTube. I mean, even Rumble has received outside investment from Cantor Fitzgerald, which is just another huge billionaire type thing that, whatever it is that comes along that they decide they don't like, they're going to block from Rumble, just like YouTube blocked stuff from YouTube. But this destruction of Crowdsource the Truth 8 and Crowdsource the Truth 9, it's different than all the previous removals, because what's happened now is George Webb, which you asked me about when this started, he's got a brother named David George Swigert. George Webb's real name is George Webb Swigert. Mm-hmm. Now, I first met George, I think it was maybe like April. You can see it was one of the first. So we've got HRC Voters in Trumpland. That was a special production I did down at the IFC Theater. Mm-hmm. Trump VR 3D. That was shot at the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. And Welcome to Fabulous Trump Vegas was a 2-dimensional traditional type mini documentary like the other Crowdsource the Truth productions that I've done. Trump Protest is another mini documentary like that about the resistance to Donald Trump's presidency that was developing around New York City as his campaign was building. This is great. This is a 2-minute encounter between me and Chuck Schumer on an Amtrak train that I recorded on a video pen, and he's a total dick. And then that takes me to this, another one of the very first interviews conducted on Crowdsource the Truth. And I mean, remember, I hadn't quite developed this style. John, the shows that you and I do every Friday are done in a format that differs from what we're doing right now and from these mini documentaries on Crowdsource the Truth. Those, and you appreciate this, you're shaking your head because you do a lot of work to produce these videos that people are going to be watching here. And what I have done is, and it's not like I invented this, I sort of, at the time that this stuff was coming about, I saw all these different pieces coming together, and I said to myself, somebody's got to have a video switching application that'll let me use iPhones as cameras. And sure enough, while I was looking for it, this new software came out, Switcher Studio, and I said, hey, this is great. And that's what I use. So what we've got is a live switched multi-camera production that traditionally, and when I say that, I mean going back to the 1940s up until, say, 6-7 years ago, mm-hmm. Traditionally in a multi-camera shoot, like on the news or a multi-camera sitcom, every camera has a camera operator. there would be a sound mixer who is monitoring every person's microphone and making sure the levels are correct and all that kind of stuff. There would separately be a boom operator operating a microphone that would be sort of like backup, recording dialogue for whoever is speaking, in addition to the microphone that's worn. My point is, you'd have a big set in a studio filled with people who are running the lights and the cameras and the sound and all that. And I sort of got this notion that I wanted to do independent journalism and sort of news podcasting, but I was put off by the format that most independent journalists were using, which was just sitting in front of their laptop and having this head reading you news from people's web pages, which it just struck me as stupid. It's like going to a PowerPoint presentation where the person is just putting a bunch of words on a slide and reading you what's written on the slide. It should have just been a handout.
There's more of that now, right? The people just watching other people's videos and then going,
but I didn't like that.
Yeah, no.
I didn't want to do that. I said to myself, there's something here, because remember, live streaming on YouTube had just come about maybe in 2014 or something. So it was pretty new. And the idea that I was like, well, let's see, if I could somehow produce a live switch thing with multiple inputs and multiple cameras, then I wouldn't have to go through all this editing and it would take so much time, and I can just like produce these videos, but I'll get away from this visual monotony of staring at a face, and it's just boring. And so I came up with this notion that I had a name in my head called the 5-camera shoot in a gym bag. And this video, Routers to Rat Lines with George Webb, that did not use the live switched format that I'm talking about. With this, I just set up a bunch of cell phones on tripods on the roof, started them recording, synchronized them all, and then edited the thing. And this took a long time. And it was successful in that George was an independent journalist who I was interested in at the time. And I figured I don't need any training or skills to sit at a table and have a conversation with a person, asking them various questions about their research that I am interested in. And I was able to utilize my skills as an independent digital content producer to make what was, for most people, the equivalent to a 60 minutes type shoot, like when, Brett Baer interviews, whoever he interviews, Putin, or who did Brett Baer just interview somebody important, or Joe Biden gets interviewed on 60 Minutes. We have this type of multi-camera shoot where there are close-ups and, it creates a very high quality, high production value viewing experience that also has its own kind of visual cadence that helps take the viewer through the conversation in a way that's visually interesting and keeps the pace going. And so again, my lifelong training as a film director and a filmmaker really was a big part in what I wanted to do in creating Crowdsource the Truth. So the way I got to this interview with George was through something that I have made yet another analogy that I think will appeal to you, John, because this goes to another aspect of your world. I consider it forcing a card. And I think people watching who maybe, if there are other skilled sleight of hand magicians out there, they'll know the tactic for forcing a card on a person. I don't know how to do it, and I'm not asking you to tell us, but people are going to be aware that if you go to a party, you go to a bar, you go to someplace where they're doing up close magic, and the magician says to you, hey, pick a card, and you pick the 2 of diamonds, and the guy says, don't show it to me, put it back in the deck. He shuffles it up and just says, boom, 2 of diamonds. How did he guess? Well, the answer is he didn't guess. He had some technique of forcing you to accept the 2 of diamonds while simultaneously causing you to think you just voluntarily selected that.
That was the secret. That was the secret. Well, that was the secret to my dating life, but continue.
Well, so here you can see this second video is Breitbart Above and Beyond. Crowdsource the Truth interviews Lee Stranahan. Now, this is a bit of an inside joke because at the time, Lee Stranahan was the lead investigative reporter for Breitbart News. And the Above and Beyond is a little bit of an inside joke. Lee and his brother, Kenny, worked on a show called Space Above and Beyond, which was one of the first broadcast television shows to utilize computer graphics for visual effects. And that's how I met Lee and Kenny, because they were really early pioneers in visual effects. And I put together a seminar that ran for a few years in New York City, where Lee and Kenny and other industry professionals came to New York, and we would do like these 2-day sessions where, go over whatever kind of topic in 3D animation. So part of what I wanted to do when I started Crowdsource the Truth was I got back in touch with Lee, hadn't spoken to him for years, and I said, hey, I'm getting into journalism. You're a journalist. Can I interview you? He said, sure. But actually, that phone conversation was prompted by the forcing of the card. And what that was is this. George had a YouTube channel. And before I met George, I had essentially lost my business, my 3D production company, 21st Century 3D. It was still a business, but the office in Los Angeles had closed. The office in New York City had closed. I had laid off all of the employees, and we were not doing any 3D jobs any longer. And basically, the entire 3D industry had essentially collapsed. And I was like 45 and had dedicated my life to this extremely specialized field that there was basically no market for anymore. So we could see here, this is how that 360 video worked. This was in Amsterdam. This is a 360 3D video of these guys doing capoeira. And we don't have any 3D equipment on this monitor, but I'm controlling, what aspect of the video we look at. And you can see this 3D stereoscopic camera, this VR camera, was so precise in its optical design and construction. Normally, when you look down at the floor, you see a big mess where the camera is. But this thing, the nodal point of the lenses were as close to identical across the range of the camera as you could possibly get. Anyway, without getting too technical, 21st Century 3D was essentially dead in the water, and I needed a new business. And so I said, well, what could I do that would be productive?
All right, but here's what I want to understand. Why did you want to talk to George? Who was George Webb that you'd have any interest in talking to George Webb? It's like, well, I know why you called me. You called me because I made a video about Frank Muth. But George Webb, and that's him sitting there with you with the headband on? Is that a headband? Is that what I'm seeing him wearing? What's he got on his head there? What is that? What's on his head?
He's just got a ridiculous haircut where he shaves off his sideburns.
What am I looking at there? I thought I was looking at it. He was wearing... What's on his forehead then? Is that a hat? What is that?
Well, he's got some kind of... I guess he's
hair.
Got a birthmark under his scalp.
Oh, it's like a Samantha thing.
He's got a tuft of gray hair there.
That's it. I thought it was a headband. I thought he was wearing something with a signet. So thank you for zooming in. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. So help me understand.
So the way this came about...
Like my mom is like, well, who the hell is this? Who is George Webb? Yeah. Why would you want to sit down and talk to this guy? Because of what?
Right.
What did he do?
Well, okay, so 21st Century 3D was on its back. I lost my beautiful house in LA. I got divorced from my second wife, Vanessa. And I was just like flat out. I mean, I had spent my whole entire life working on 3D, developing these 3D cameras. I made it out to LA. I was working on Spider-Man and X-Men. And then that whole thing spun out. And I lost all of my money. And I lost my house. And I mean, luckily, I still had this apartment that I'm in right now. So I just sort of came back to New York and I was regrouping, thinking about what I was going to do, thinking about jobs I could apply for and what I would possibly do. And meanwhile, I had to sell all of my professional camera equipment to be able to buy food and stuff like that. So I was sitting in this apartment listing like $20,000 lenses on eBay. And obviously I didn't get $20,000 for the $20,000 lens, but this was expensive stuff. And I lost a lot of money on it, of course, but I was able to sell it and have enough money to operate for a while. And when I first began, I said, well, I'll just make videos like this, and then I'll do 3D jobs, and, this will fill in the gaps when there's no 3D, and I'll use the money from 3D to do this. But it quickly became obvious that no 3D jobs were coming around, and you just can't do two totally different things at the same time. You got to devote your attention to something. And I needed a job, and I wanted to do these videos, and it was just clear that I was going to have to do this in a way that would make money. But sorry, I forgot to mention, how did I meet George? So Vanessa's gone, no money, no job. And I was involved in this helicopter company. And through a long story, I had injured my knee and had surgery. And I was rehabbing my knee, just, riding an elliptical bike in the basement of this apartment building. Mm-hmm. And so I was watching YouTube for like 60 to 90 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. And I was I was interested in the JFK assassination, and I was watching lots of YouTube shows about that. And that would lead me to
Don McGard, right?
Yeah, it probably led me to Ole, right? It led me through all of this stuff. It basically, it opened my mind to this concept. I mean, I was aware of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I was aware that YouTube was using an algorithm. And I became intrigued by this concept that me, as a human, asking certain questions of this YouTube video algorithm engine, creating this profile that curates lists of videos for me, was super interesting. Because for instance, one of the things that it did, I got very focused on the JFK assassination. And I watched everything from, newsreels from 1964 with Walter Cronkite to a documentary made by a guy. I think this guy goes by Russian Vids or something like that. He's kind of like a guy who, he's like in his basement. And he seems like maybe he's a little bit of a wacko. And this video was totally crazy. In the video, basically, he comes to the conclusion that Jackie Kennedy shot JFK. And some of the evidence that he uses is just a terribly decimated, awful copy of the Zapruder film that admittedly has anomalies in it that look weird. But when you look at more recent, higher quality, or I should say restored, higher quality versions of the Zapruder film, you can tell that that's not what happened. Yeah. It's an absurd conclusion. Everything about this guy's approach and his conclusions idiotic, except he says in the video that Jacqueline Bouvier, used her connections in the French military to initiate an investigation that French intelligence conducted. And the guy who did the investigation wrote a book called Farewell America. And I had never heard of that before. I got that book. That thing was loaded with tons of very good information about the JFK assassination. So I said to myself, that's interesting that this guy who seems like a complete idiot and presents a video that is like 99.875% absolute crap, because of my discernment as an intelligent human, I can take that feedback from an algorithm and sort of sift through the crap to get that one little gem. And I can sift through mountains of crap collecting the gems. And I can say, out of, 1,000 pieces of crap, I now have 4 gems. And those 4 gems go into my collection of 10. And these 10 gems answer the question. So I became fascinated by this sort of concept that even if someone seems completely ignorant, they might know something about something that you don't know something about. And that if you can do this kind of crowdsource investigative journalism tactic, it seems like something that was the moment, learning about the book from this incredibly stupid video. I realized that there's potential to learn something from everyone. And then, the algorithm just fed me George Webb's videos, which at the time were quite unique in that he was making videos that, what was he covering? He's a PowerPoint guy because he came from the corporate kind of software world that you were in. He used to work for Sun Microsystems, and he was a salesman for McAfee, I think, or
oh God, I know
McAfee.
Dude, I know a whole bunch of guys that were at Mac. I never knew this. I knew a whole bunch of guys from McAfee. Do you
Yeah,
know
George was a salesman at McAfee. I
that?
didn't
You know
know
what
that. I
that
mean, I
means?
presumed
Do you know what that means?
that he was selling crap for the CIA.
No, it means that there's a whole bunch of guys that I know that used to
Yeah.
work with him. In other words, you're telling me right now you can pull him up on McAfee at McAfee and LinkedIn will show George Webb having worked at McAfee?
Well, I don't know about that. He's told me he's worked for McAfee. I guess I've never run it down now that you mention it. Look at
I
this. Here's
told you.
Webb versus McAfee, but that can't be him. That would have to be Swigert versus McAfee.
George. So, I don't know. Why? Why would it have to be?
Oh, yeah, wait. Yeah, let's look up George Swigert, McAfee. Well, I don't know, but he's the one who said that he worked at McAfee and that Dmitry Alperovich worked at McAfee, and George said that they were creating viruses. I mean, you know, I don't know. We could run that down, but this is what he has said. That's his admission, and there's no reason to expect that he would lie about that. So until we find information that he's lying, he says he works.
I'm just curious
at McAfee.
If it like what years he was at McAfee, because again, I worked with a bunch of guys at McAfee. So if he was at McAfee in the late 1980s, early 90s, this could be pretty interesting. You know, I know guys that, you know, there he is.
Well, here's his
look how much of the circle his head consumes. I mean, first of all, I think that's a remarkable phenomenon right there. So, all right. So wait, slow down. Let's take a look at this. This is interesting. This is LinkedIn. So again, so you see him on YouTube. He's doing some YouTube stuff. Seems interesting. And you're like, oh, interview this guy. Right?
Yeah.
It was like,
yeah.
So it could have just as easily have been a Jake Morphonius. It could have been,
no.
Anybody else? No. Okay.
No.
Because
George had a pretty unique thing going on. Well, because again, I had identified, I was watching Lionel, and I was watching H.A. Goodman, and I was watching Luke Rudkowski, and a variety of David Seaman, variety of different people who maybe aren't even necessarily there. Okay. And I was in this routine. You know, I would wake up, I would go to the gym. The other thing I got into when Vanessa left was detox, health. She didn't drink. So when I was married to her, I kind of I didn't say like, oh my God, I got to quit drinking or whatever. She just didn't drink. So whenever we went out, we really didn't drink. And I kind of got out of drinking. And I said, boy, I'm saving a lot of money and I'm feeling better. Then I got into detox and lost like 20 pounds and just don't want to drink anymore for the most part. Mm-hmm. But why did I start talking about this?
I don't know. We're talking about, because anyway, you said George had something special.
He was working out because I got into a workout regimen. So basically every day I would go down to the gym. I would work out on this elliptical bike and I would watch Lionel and George. Well, not George necessarily, but Lionel and H.A. Goodman, all these different guys. And I got to a point. This is when I had the realization about the 5-camera studio in a gym bag. I said, you know, I want to hear what these guys have to say about the, you know, news and breaking information or whatever. But I'm just so bored of looking at this same exact
sitting
frame
in his head
every day.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me because I was watching these 1964, 1963 broadcasts with Walter Cronkite. And I said to myself, in 1963, most people turning on a television were so fascinated with just the concept of what the hell this is, that it was like amazing.
Magic.
But you and I and everybody probably watching this who essentially grew up with television, who has been around television for 70 years or whatever it is, it's just there. It's a thing. And the content of television has matured along with the technology. And now that I'm saying this, people will automatically understand what I'm saying. You go look at a news broadcast from 1963, and it is so much more primitive than a news broadcast of today in that they aren't cutting from camera to camera. They don't have video insets. They don't have 3 people on screen speaking at once that then, you know, dissolves to one person with a graphic graphic inset and type overlay and things moving past on the screen. If you transported someone from 1963 to 2023 and sat them in front of a television, it would be like information overload. I don't know that they would even be able to process it. But my point is, when you go back in time by watching these broadcasts, you're going to say to yourself, wow, now that I'm thinking about what Jason is saying about this, I get it. This is a much slower moving broadcast. It's not constantly changing angles and flashing colorful things in front of me. I am a consumer of motion picture entertainment and visual stimulation that speaks this modern language of motion pictures, not this old, it's a good day, sir. Top of the morning to you, Mr. Cullen. Lovely to see you on this motion video broadcast today. It's like some old time stuff, you know?
Elon Musk talks about this. So Elon Musk says that what you're describing, the difference between this new multi-camera shoot model that you can run off of an iPad versus what people were kind of used to seeing, and we're still seeing. You know, again, H.A. Goodman, he's kind of a good guy, but you just sit there and look at his head, and he's
a social engineer.
Well, whatever. But you just listen to his head.
Because he plays a role in the George Webb story.
Okay, but from an exciting to watch wouldn't be the description anybody's using to say the reason I tune into H.A. Goodman is because that stage and the setting and the band and it's exciting and he's cut. That is not what's going on here. And what Elon Musk has said is that the world of Twitter, the world of YouTube is really kind of a battle for endorphins. And that when people watch content that's multimedia, it's multi-camera, it kicks off. It's more exciting. It's more interesting. It's why all the movies now are Marvel, and they've got 10 superheroes in the same movie. It's because it's nonstop action. It's nonstop action. Cut, bang, bing, bang, bang, bang. And from an endorphin level, you're exhausted. By the time you're 3 minutes into the movie and you're like, my God, I need a nap. I'm wiped out already. That's Elon Musk talks about this and says sort of the different, some people just post on Twitter, and then some people post videos with everything they say, like, right. Which one should be getting more engagement? The one with all the
what you're saying is correct, but it's slightly different than what I'm saying. I don't want anybody to think that my plan was, I'm just going to be a lot of, flash and that's it. I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about selling sizzle over steak. And actually, I'm glad you raised it because, if you look at H.A. Goodman's YouTube page, first of all, when I started, I remember him talking about reaching 80,000 and approaching 100,000. That was 7 years ago. Right. And I got to 120,000 3 years ago before they kicked me off. So, I mean, again, this is somebody who I saw, he's talking about all of his journalism accolades and awards. He's sitting there with his YouTube, award, whatever that is. And yet what I was talking about seemed to appeal to a large group of people that would certainly be more than 203,000 if I had been allowed to stay on there. And another thing that George and I sort of clashed on initially is that, and I think that H.A. Goodman would probably agree with this philosophy that it's about the content of the information. Nobody cares how it's packaged, what it looks like, et cetera. Now, I haven't watched H.A. Goodman in a long, long time, but it's interesting to note that he's now using a green screen to insert himself in the corner here. Very amateur production. Obviously, it's terribly lit, creating a lot of noise and this floating edge that really just draws more attention to this incredibly distracting effect, makes him look weird and stupid. And I think that's distracting from the message. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that he's done this because somebody probably got in his ear and told him what I realized, that his show is boring and he needs to change it up.
Exactly.
But, from watching guys like this, that led me to George. And when I was watching George, you asked me how that interview came about. So I was watching George, hadn't interacted with any of these guys yet, hadn't even got back in touch with Lee Stranahan yet. And I was watching George, and he said in one of his broadcasts, hey, if anybody knows Lee Stranahan, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., and I'd like to talk to Lee. And at the time, this seemed like a totally normal thing to me. Lee is a conservative journalist. George was ostensibly a conservative journalist. I knew about George and Lee. A lot of people knew about George and Lee. George wants to talk to Lee. So I contacted George. Maybe, I think you could direct message people on YouTube at that time, but I somehow transmitted Lee's phone number to George because I had it from way back in the day. And I guess Lee hadn't changed his phone number. And so now I was in contact with George, but this is what I have come to determine was the forcing of the card, because it appeared to me that I contacted George of my own accord, like I selected the card. But certainly it would be easy to monitor George Webb's YouTube channel and say, okay, who's interacting in the chat? I don't remember, but I'm sure at the time you could even see who is subscribed to the channel. Somebody's got the ability to see who is subscribed to the channel, and I was definitely interacting in the chat. And even without any special access to YouTube, you could just go through, oh, who's this person chatting? No videos posted. Who's this person chatting? Oh, their little kid's birthday. Who's this person chatting? Cat videos. Who's this person chatting? Oh, wait a minute. Here's a guy making, 3D videos about Trump, interviewing people, pumping out 45-minute documentaries overnight, doing, all these interesting, this is just, even this is a world more advanced than anything that our buddy H.A. Goodman is doing, where he just, snags some undoubtedly stolen photo from a news photographer, doesn't repurpose it at all, and just uses it to promote his channel. What I was saying was, look, it's well known that for low budget movies, they spent almost as much money on the photography for the poster and the package for the video as they spend on the whole entire movie. And again, I'm not saying that I wanted to make my strategy for Crowdsource the Truth to make good thumbnail images and crappy videos. My strategy was, hey, George, it's not just the steak. You got to have sizzle. Because you could have the best filet mignon in the world. If you throw it in a brown paper bag and bury it under a pile of garbage and then present someone with a McDonald's hamburger plated up on fine china with a glass of wine next to it, which one of those two things is going to be more visually appealing, but which one of them is the fundamentally higher quality product? So what I was arguing was
let me give you a great example. Jimmy Fallon goes into the New York City subway system with Adam Levine and Maroon 5. Right. They all dress up like hobos.
Right.
And they perform in the subway dressed as hobos.
Right.
Nobody even bats an eyelash. No one even looks. And it's Maroon 5 in the New York City subway. I mean, it's Adam Levine from The Voice or whatever the hell the show. That's it. And they're all just like, nobody even bats an eyelash. And it becomes so embarrassing that, what's his name? Fallon takes off his disguise and goes, hey, it's us.
And then it's a big crowd.
And then it was like, oh, okay. And like, who are you? Right. But this is kind of the point, that the content does matter, but the packaging matters too.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So Peter.
And dude, this is like 46th and 6th. This is not some obscure location. This is going to be one of the busiest subway stations.
They can't get $1. Nobody's paying it. Nothing. People are just walking by.
But so see, that's exactly what I'm talking about. What I set out to do was to take the best independent journalism that I could create or collaborate with other people to create and package it in a way that was intriguing and interesting and appealing to a wide audience. And I felt that having eye-catching thumbnails was an important part of that. And of course, I mean, the rest is history. Everybody knows that Crowdsource the Truth is famously known for creating, really intriguing thumbnails that use, cutting edge graphic techniques, Photoshop and artificial intelligence, and coming up with funny and intriguing things with the top independent journalists and researchers who are out there today. And I think it's been a really successful model.
This
but
is
that's
interesting. I didn't know that it was the
George.
least. So the Lease Stranahan thing. Let's talk about this for a minute. So
Yeah.
let's come up with an analogy or a metaphor. If somebody wanted to make it look like it was happenstance, they might put something out and say, does anybody know where we can find the data on how many people died in Beijing from COVID?
Right.
And everybody's like, oh, yeah, John Cullen's got that. Oh, okay.
Right.
Next thing you know, I'm talking to Peter McCullough, and it looks like it was fortuitous.
Right.
Right.
And it could be a third party that sets that up. For instance, one of the stories that I've been covering since 2017 is this death of Peter Smith and some of the surrounding circumstances. And one of the factors in that mystery is that Peter Smith had an assistant named Jonathan Safran. And Charles has an email that was forwarded to Charles from Peter Smith that included an email forwarded to Smith from Safran. And the email from Safran to Smith says essentially, hey, this guy Shane Harris from the Wall Street Journal contacted me on LinkedIn. He wants you to get in touch with him. So Peter Smith gets this email from his assistant Safran and calls Shane Harris of the Wall Street Journal. Shane Harris, after Smith is dead, writes in the Wall Street Journal, hey, Peter Smith called me, essentially out of the blue. And that's not correct. But Shane Harris now could go into court, raise his right hand, and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and say, Peter Smith called me. But there's a lot of that. They do that. They want to get somebody else to get you to do something. George would say all the time, very frequently, why isn't Jason investigating X, Y, or Z?
Right.
And, you see, another reason why this Odyssey channel is so valuable now is because, they want to do away with Crowdsource the Truth and delete the YouTube channels so that it hurts the reach and so that we can't get new sponsors. Typically, the way the whole system has worked is with the Jason Goodman YouTube channel, when it had 100,000 and more subscribers, you and I, or any co-host and I, would put out a video and 10, 20, 60,000 people would see it. Mm-hmm. And there would be enticements in that video for people to become sponsors on the various sponsorship channels. And obviously, if 60,000 people receive a sales pitch, you're going to get more takers than if 6,000 people receive a sales pitch. And so they've been trying to chop down these big channels to prevent people from seeing the work, to prevent Crowdsource the Truth and the associated co-hosts from getting new sponsors. And it's been somewhat effective. Now, see, this is interesting. George introduced me to Larry Nichols, right? This video here, the story of the Clinton Foundation, this was the very first one that utilized the Switcher software. And there were still some legacy videos done the old way. This was with Dr. Corsi. George was an important part of that. This was one of the first videos with Charles. And elsewhere, I've restored the very first video with Charles, which is where we received the phone call from Shane Harris, and this whole entire Peter Smith story started to unfold. So it's important for people to appreciate George set that meeting with Charles. I didn't know Charles at all. I was aware of him from seeing him on Lionel and everything. But George came in, you know, he put out that video saying, hey, who wants to introduce me to Lee? I introduced him to Lee. And then I called George. I called Lee and I said, hey, that was me who gave George your info. That was great seeing your video with George. Can you give me George's number? I want to call him. And Lee did. And I called George and I said, hey, while you're in DC, I don't know if you're coming to New York, but maybe we could do an interview. He said, yeah, I am. And we arranged to meet up and do this interview.
All right. So hang on. All right. So through George Webb, you end up meeting Charles, who you've got now a long-term relationship with. But you also meet a whole bunch of other people through George Webb, like Joe Napoli and some others, I believe. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Many.
So you just said Larry Nichols. Who else, like now thinking back, help us connect it. It's like, wait a second, you met this guy and that guy and this one and that one all through George Webb.
So in chronological order a little bit. So this is Patricia Negron. She's one of the first people that George introduced me. Well, she went by Trish the Dish. And she was an independent journalist, blogger, Twitter, YouTuber type.
Are you guys on the Long Island Railroad or an airplane? What are you doing here? Where are you sitting?
That's an airplane to London.
You're flying to London with Trish the Dish.
Yeah.
And what are you doing?
This was cool.
What are you going to London for?
Oh, wait, there's a lot of different stuff. Well, so remember, George was doing a whole story about Imran Awan. I first heard of Imran Awan from George, and he presented a lot of incredibly compelling evidence that this guy was working as an IT contractor in Congress, and that all these members of his family were working there, and he was being paid the top salary that you could possibly be paid as a congressional aide. And he was getting all these bank loans and buying real estate and renting out real estate and doing all this crazy stuff. So we started following Imran Awan, and he introduced me to Trish. And Trish had been doing a series about George called The Accidental Journalist. And I think she was doing it on Medium or Twitter or something like that. And so George introduces me to Trish and says, hey, this person, Trish, she's in touch with someone who has this thumb drive that allegedly contains the information that Seth Rich leaked to WikiLeaks from the DNC. And I didn't know exactly what was going on with the DNC and WikiLeaks and the thumb drive. He tells me here it is.
And I'm hot like, lead, and you're starting out in journalism. Yeah, I'd be all over it too. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay. And you know what? I might not have been as careful 7 years ago as I am today. There might have been a little bit of hype going on, but whatever. We put this thing out there, and it's like, hey, here's information for people to look at. If you know something about it, help us figure out what's going on with this.
An airplane with Trisha. You're flying to London with the chick with a thumb drive?
Hang on.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
She comes over to this apartment. George just comes over. He says, okay, we're going to meet somebody in about an hour. She's coming over here with this thumb drive. Everything with George was always an emergency and some crazy thing unraveling.
Chaos.
And it could
always be chaos. Always chaos.
Right. It could be that he's just one of these chaos personalities who is an alcoholic, as far as I can tell, and just maybe that's just a personality flaw. Or it could be that he was trying to put me into a specific frame, and that creating this constant heightened sense of urgency sort of kept me on the edge.
Frantic. We gotta go. Get out of time. We gotta go. Gotta run.
So it's like this. Let's go live. Let's go live. He kept doing that.
Yeah.
And this was one of the major points that didn't work for us, is that he would say, look, I don't care what the thumbnail is. It doesn't matter how this is packaged. This is the content. We need to go live right now. Right. And I was saying to him, now, wait a minute. No, That's not the way that this can work, because my whole point is we need to create a multi-camera show that is live switched and produced in such a way that it's going to create this specific product that I have envisioned. And that is not compatible with you storming in the door saying, let's go live in 30 seconds.
I think
I need to know.
Wait, you skipped the song in the album. The song you skipped in the album was how you went from interviewing
Trish.
No, George. We'll get back to Trish. You went from interviewing George, and getting the opportunity to meet with him after he meets with Lee,
to doing the regular show.
To all of a sudden you're doing a show with George. How did you end up doing a show with George?
Yeah.
How did he ingratiate himself? How did he ingratiate himself to you?
He didn't do that.
Okay, so
I did that, so and I think they could
crush.
probably tell.
You had a man crush on.
No. It was that I was trying to create a business. Look, if
he's already established. He was like he's got 200,000 followers, so he's like a big shot, right?
Let's say I magically come into $5 million.
Yeah.
Monopoly happens. Long lost great uncle dies. I get $5 million, and I say, you know what? I want to leave New York City. I want to buy a fishing boat and move to the Caribbean, and I'm going to own a charter fishing boat. I'm going to live on the boat, but I don't know a damn thing about boats, how to run them, how to drive them, or whatever. So I need to hire a captain who's going to run the boat. I'm the CEO of Jason's fishing boat charter, but I don't know a damn thing about how to run the boat. I essentially said to George, hey, look, I'm not a journalist. I don't know anything about journalism. Your videos absolutely suck. Why don't you and I get together, and I'll be like your video producer. I'll shoot all the videos and you'll be the primary talent, the main journalist or whatever. And I don't have any money to give you, but we'll work on this thing together, and you'll have your YouTube channel and I'll have my YouTube channel. Yeah. And we didn't really start a business together, but we just sort of like two buddies starting some sort of club where we're going to do something, and we're starting to do it, and we're voluntarily making videos on each other's YouTube channels. And that started going well. And I went to Washington, D.C., and we're staying in hotels. And I said to him, hey, look, in order for you to let this person in on what you're doing, which maybe you don't want to do, why don't I pay for the hotel rooms? And my thinking was, I need a hotel room anyway. I don't really care if he's sleeping in the unused bed. This makes it an attractive deal for him because he's saving money. Again, I'm not paying the guy, but I'm just trying to find a way to make this kind of startup endeavor work.
Yeah, make it work. Yeah.
And so eventually, after we spend a few weeks making videos in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, people are responding to them really, really well.
Sure.
Because we're getting into intriguing topics, and just the idea was good. It was interesting. It became like a combination between a reality show, a buddy movie, a news broadcast. It really it was a bunch of different things coming together in a moment that was really interesting. And also, I think there was a significant amount of social engineering being used to boost the whole thing unnaturally. Okay. So now we're at the stage where I've said, hey, George, rather than spending all this money on hotels, I have a 1-bedroom apartment in New York. You could crash on the couch. Why don't you come to New York? I can't pay you, and I'm not offering you equity in anything, but you could save money. You could crash on my couch. We'll make videos every day and whatever. So we started doing that. But then,
whoa. So he takes you up on this and moves into your apartment?
2.5, 3 months, he's crashing on the couch. I wouldn't say he moved in. He had literally like maybe one backpack and one duffel bag, and he's crashing on the couch. He didn't.
Where was he
have
living
a room here?
All right, so where had he been living?
He had sold his house, according to what he told me. Yeah. The story that he was telling at the time was that, so he was working as a salesman at Sun Microsystems, a salesman with McAfee, maybe Salesforce.com. I don't know. He's just having these all kind of just like normal sales jobs. And then something happened with the Portland Christmas tree bomber, according to him, where he now said that the FBI was somehow trying to frame George for something.
Whoa.
And that Andrew McCabe at the FBI was doing X, Y, and Z to George. So George sold his house and became a whistleblower and was doing all this stuff on YouTube to blow the whistle on all this confusing and vague stuff about Andrew McCabe. And separately, his brother, David, who, and I meant to mention this to you, we need to be careful. If you're going to put this out on YouTube, his brother is undoubtedly going to try to attack your YouTube channel. And I meant to ask you this before we started. I don't want to risk your YouTube channel. Maybe this whole thing should be sponsor exclusive, or we do some intro to what we're talking about and then make it sponsor exclusive. But simultaneous with George putting out these videos, his brother would put out videos. And there were similarities that I realize now that I didn't realize then. And so the similarities, you were asking earlier, what kind of videos was George putting out? Mm-hmm. And when I said his videos were crap, but the content was interesting, here's what I mean. Mm-hmm. George would create a PowerPoint presentation. Mm-hmm. And so when I would go to the Cannes Film Festival or the British Film Institute, I would also create a PowerPoint presentation. But you and I agree that people who put a lot of words in PowerPoint presentations and then read them do not understand what PowerPoint is for or how to give a public presentation. And it annoyed me so much seeing presentations from people who did that, that in my own mind, I made a rule that there would be almost no text whatsoever ever in a PowerPoint presentation that I would give, and that it would just be images, and then I would talk about the images, and I'd use the images to guide me through the PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. But George didn't do that. He was sort of like a sales guy. I'm like a visual effects and graphics and photo retouching artist making a PowerPoint presentation. Mm-hmm. He's a sales guy who's kind of lucky he knows how to use PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of like, you know, I'm not saying he's a bad sales guy, but you know what I mean. You can see a PowerPoint presentation where you say, all right, this guy's obviously not a PowerPoint artist, but I like the points he's making and I'm going to buy the product.
Well, there's a book.
That's what he was.
There's a book called Really Bad PowerPoint by Seth Godin. And it is a classic in marketing. And it is the difference between what you're describing with
yes.
George and sort of the example of probably the best in the game would be Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs would go on stage and the whole screen is gray and there's one picture, one image.
Or one word.
Or one word.
One word.
Right.
Something like that.
And he talks around that as a supporting concept.
Right.
And that's impactful. And most people, like you said, have got, 14 bullets on the slide. And then they go through the 14 bullets and you're like, oh my God, get me out of here.
Right.
Oh, I know, man. It used to drive me crazy because I was a huge
and Steve Jobs. Fan. He's using the same techniques that I'm talking about.
Yeah,
using visual language to guide someone through a presentation. Whereas what you're describing is somebody reading you a laundry list that it's just like I'm bored already.
Exactly. As soon as you see the first slide,
YouTube channel, he would make a PowerPoint presentation on his laptop.
Right.
And then the YouTube video was he had an Android cell phone, that was 10 years old 7 years ago, and he would shake it around in front of a laptop while he would go through the PowerPoint slides. And, the stuff that he was talking about with Pakistani ISI infiltrating Congress, stealing information, it was like, whoa, 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 hold the phone. That's incredibly intriguing. But the presentation, you had
disaster.
To have
it's a mess, right? Yeah. You're like, dude, I was on Spider-Man. I can make you a contender. You can make him a contender, right?
In my view, this was a great synergy of somebody who, because when I observed him, I said, hey, now wait a minute. Here's somebody doing exactly what I'm talking about, crowdsource investigative journalism. Because he would also do it like incrementally throughout the day, where he'd say, okay, day one, this is version 1.2. And now we've had a viewer come into the comments and say that, you know, this guy over here, Imran Awan, he had a bank loan from, you know, Hina Alva or whatever. And so he would do that throughout the day. He would update the videos, and it became this really intriguing kind of serialized, you know, totally opposite of, you know, if you in 2017 asked some 28-year-old person, what do I need to do to create a YouTube channel? They would tell you the videos need to be shorter than 7 minutes, and it needs to be about some, you know, eating Tide Pods or some kind of crap that you and I and our audience is not interested in. And I just said, well, I'm not doing any of that. I'm just looking at YouTube as a broadcast vehicle, and I think people will go there wanting to see long-form documentaries and interviews and things like that. And sure enough, I was right. Because remember, the rise of Joe Rogan and all of this stuff has happened in this same 7-year period. Tucker Carlson went from being the #1 most viewed anchor on a traditional news show to now being in the business that we are in, doing a podcast from essentially a studio in his home. So,
on Twitter, and getting well over 10 times the viewership.
yeah.
So the number of
Right.
people that are watching his programs on Twitter, you know, are being measured in the tens of millions of views,
Right.
versus what he was getting.
You see, and I'm not like an industry analyst who sits in an office looking at reports of like, well, what's going on with television viewing in Europe and what's happening with streaming over here. There are people who do that. Your type of thinking, quantitative analysts who could look at all these streams of data and make various determinations about a market's future or its potential future, and then investors or industry leaders or whatever are going to look at that analyst's assessment and make various decisions based on that. Now, I don't engage in that type of quantitative analysis of data per se, but for instance, when I created my 3D video camera, I said to myself, wow, that's interesting that Panasonic has released a digital camera that does full frame, 24 frame per second capture. That was new at the time. And I realized certain things about the design of that camera that would be very good for making a 3D camera. And I didn't sit around and make an analysis and say, hey, because of X, Y, and Z factor, 3D movies are going to become a market and this amount of money, and I'm going to capture this amount of it by doing X, Y, and Z. I just sort of said, hey, this is happening with technology. I like 3D. I could make it happen. And all these things just sort of culminated at a moment where that was happening. And the same thing happened with independent news live streaming. Remember, live streaming on YouTube, I think, came about in 2014. Let's just check that.
I remember when you first got me into doing
2011.
This. Okay, but
2012.
When you first
but
got
I don't
me
think
into
they opened it to everyone.
No.
I think that was YouTube doing it. I don't think your average person could live stream. Look at this.
Yeah.
So it says in February 2017,
I'm
still
looking at you and Trish. I'm still looking at you and Trish.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. There you go.
So look at this. It says, wait a minute. Where is that?
1 billion hours of videos watched every day. Billion a day.
How did that just go away? I was looking at it. Let's go back. Here we go. YouTube. Okay. So it says right here. So YouTube carried out early experiments with live streaming. In April 2011, they announced the rollout of YouTube Live. Creation of live streams was initially limited to select partners. 2013, creation of live streams was open to users with at least that. So that's what I'm saying. This wasn't a widespread
Hang on.
thing.
Live streaming via mobile was reduced to 100 subscribers.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. It was 2016,
Right.
2017 that YouTube Live was really taking off. And so my whole concept of a multi-camera shoot in a bag, that led to the multi-camera switched live stream. And that was innovative. Nobody was doing that when I first started doing
You
that.
showed up, dude. You showed up in Thailand with your duffel bag of, Felix the Cat tricks. And you're like, dude, it's going to take me like an hour and a half to set up. And next thing I know, you got like 7 tripods, wires all over the place. I've never seen so many iPhones in a room in my life. And we did a multi-camera shoot in a hotel room in Thailand. It came out fantastic.
With no crew.
It was crazy. And you're doing live switching. And as we're doing it, you're switching from camera to camera. Nobody even knows you're doing it. It's crazy.
And John, 7 years ago to do that, we would have needed a permit with that hotel. They would have wanted to charge you some excessive production fee. You'd probably need to get the cops and the fire department involved. We'd have 10 people in that room.
Crowder.
Lunch for everybody.
How would Crowder pull that off? Crowder's got 6 guys in the back room running the show.
They can't go to Thailand and interview somebody in a hotel.
No. All right, listen, we've been going about an hour and a half. I think what we should do.
Barely got into it.
We should take a break, and we're going to record part 2, which is the Imran Awan piece of the story, because you guys end up going to the property. And this is where it's sort of, I think George starts doing some weird stuff. And then there's this whole story of what happens in the port of Charleston, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. And so to me, this is where sort of the relationship with George goes off the rails. So now I think people have a better understanding how you guys met, what was the draw, what was the connection. One of the things we need to explore a little bit further, we talked about Joe Napoli. We talked about he introduces you or somehow you meet.
But there's a lot more.
Of course there's more.
John, I think we need to do a series on this, not because George Webb is of particular importance, but because this is a net that was cast around me to attempt to subject me. I really do believe, after looking at this for 7 years and still having more stuff to look at, the reason this was all done was that they wanted to find someone who was creating an independent news channel who they could then use as essentially the poster child for censorship of the internet. Remember, in 2017, the notion of a disinformation governance board or a European online safety law that would make it such that you cannot question the outcome of an election or something like that, that was such a foreign idea in 2017. I believe the Port of Charleston incident that you are referring to was created and executed with the intention of framing someone, and that someone became me, plug in your Patsy, framing someone for staging some sort of incident on an independent news broadcast that would prove to the public that we can't just have independent people doing the news. We need licenses for journalists. We need a disinformation governance board. We need trusted news sources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe their intention was to get me put in jail in the same way that somebody wanted Adam Dean Fox to go to jail for kidnapping Gretchen Whitmer, which he was eventually found not guilty of. I believe they wanted me to go to jail for what they claim was the staging of a bomb hoax in the Port of Charleston, and then that would be used to usher in all of this stuff. But the reason I think we should do a series about this is because there is a network of social engineers that I allege are affiliated with George Webb and his brother, and I think people could learn a lot from us talking about it.
So let's do it. Now we got to come up with a name. If it's going to be a series, then the series needs a name. We're going to have to come up with a name.
Exposing social engineers.
Well, I think somehow we have to have a pun that plays on the web of something, right? It's got to be a web.
Yes. Exposing the web of social
engineering. I mean, I'm wondering, was there social engineering in a sophisticated manner like this, where they're using honeypots? I mean, we'll talk about some of the honeypot characters next time, right? Connected through Joe Napoli. We'll talk about that. But so many of the people that you end up interacting with early on in this journalism journey of yours before you met me, it's kind of wild. The Fango, the Queen Tuts, it's like all these characters
Right.
here. And it's kind of wild. And the fact that this ends up with Imran Awan, who, like, that's a whole nother story with Hillary Clinton and the DNC, this connection that you're on this airplane with Trish the Dish to go find out more about what happened, I guess, with Seth Rich and the Seth Rich connection.
No. Well, that was to go to try to see Eric Braverman, who was, we were trying to visit Julian Assange. And also we were trying to see Eric Braverman because that's where the whole thing with George began. He was doing this series called Where is Eric Braverman? And Eric Braverman was the CEO of the Clinton Foundation.
Oh.
And what happened was when all this stuff happened with the DNC and the emails and all of this, he, according to George, had fled to the Russian embassy and was apparently, the story George was trying to weave was that Eric Braverman was fearing for his life and nobody had seen him for months. So he was going to be speaking at this thing called the Blavatnik School of Government in Oxford, England. And we went there and there is Eric Braverman. So George had been doing this series for maybe like a year saying, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? And on June 20th, 2017, I went to England and found him and made this video called There is Eric Braverman to answer the question that George had been asking all along of where is Eric Braverman? And John, the reaction to me showing up at this Blavatnik School of Government in Oxford was insane. They would not let me near Eric Braverman. First, they tried to throw us out before Braverman arrived. And it was like, how the hell do you even know who we are? Because Mr. Chavez made a video where he said he was Chavez is DeFango, said he was contacting his friends at Oxford at the Blavatnik School of Government. So obviously he said that. This woman was the dean of the school, told us we had to leave. I said, why? And she said, because you're not registered for the whole program. And we said, well, so what? We registered for this. We're here for this. And they said, well, you weren't here earlier this morning. And we said, we were. And she was running out of excuses as to why we were thrown out. So I just negotiated to, can we sit in the back? And she said, fine. Then we had that video of Braverman walking in. He gives a whole speech where, John, he said things in this speech where he was looking right at me and I was looking right at him. And I felt that he knew who I was and what I was doing there. And the things that he was saying were about how technology could be used to solve problems around the world. Like in these remote locations, if people have mobile phones with cameras, they can take pictures of things and send them. And he was essentially talking about crowdsourcing to solve problems. And I just got that video is still up on the Blavatnik School of Government. They published that, not me. But the point is, when I tried to speak to Braverman after his speech, I was physically prevented from doing that on 3 separate occasions, with the final one being a guy grabbing me with both hands, British beefeater kind of guy wearing an Oxford security shirt, grabbed me and prevented me from entering an elevator that Braverman was in, so that I couldn't speak to him or answer. They just physically prevented me from entering the elevator. That was quite strange. Braverman was exfiltrated from the room.
Did George know you were going to England with Trish?
Yes.
So he knew you were
still a team then. George, Jason, and Trish were like the hottest thing on alternate news in YouTube. The amount of views were exploding. People were like, ooh, they're like the Mod Squad. And, from my point of view, I was always, and still today, I'm always looking for the angle of, yes, the content is critical, but this is also essentially a TV program,
Yeah,
and we want
it's
people to
entertaining.
watch it.
Yeah.
We want it to grow, not so much entertaining, but we want it to be compelling. We want people to want to watch so that they tell other people and share it, and the show grows and the message grows, and the purpose of everything that we are doing becomes fulfilled. And so from that standpoint, I always want to make it better. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is true. This is good. You know, I didn't like it that, you know, certain things that Trish did or whatever, but there was a team there that had a dynamic that people liked. And I was trying to keep that team together. But listen, I'm rambling now. There's a ton for us to talk about on this, but this Eric Braverman thing, it was very important. And it's also important, John, because this story is so interwoven and so integrated. And that is important because people might want to dismiss some of these things as random coincidences and occurrences. But I just do not believe that George's brother would spend the amount of time and resources that he has spent on the lawsuits and the various things that he's done pursuing me if he wasn't motivated by something extremely compelling, like a large salary or the threat of something very bad happening to him if he doesn't. It does not make sense that somebody would pursue me in the way that he has for 6.5 years unless I still represent a significant threat to whoever it is that's motivating him to try to stop me.
Well, and you know, we've talked about, you know, are we an acceptable risk? And how close to that line are we? You know, what do they call it? Code 50 or something, when the government decides.
Yeah, you taught me about that.
Yeah, we can't arrest them, right? So that's sort of
Right.
the you know, Julian Assange. They figured out, well, we're going to take him into custody and we're going to arrest him. And Snowden, if he tries to come into the United States, will be arrested. But you and I haven't committed any crimes, and this is so frustrating for these guys. And I can tell you, I got the Pegasus stuff on my machine. I mean, I know it's here. I watch the performance.
I think we all have some version of that.
Dude, I watch the performance just go to hell. It just goes, and I'm typing and the words don't even show up for 2 seconds.
I have seen that happen.
Yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. So it's like, guys, we know you're watching. So it is a threat. Again, I talk about this regularly, that there are people that work for the government that think that this type of journalism that we're doing, this First Amendment, you know, the freedom of the press, which is what we do. We identify as journalists, right? So yeah, if Caitlyn Jenner is a woman, I'm a journalist. Okay. So nobody better question that. I'm going to bitch slap you. So as a journalist, there's a role of journalism. There's a reason that the First Amendment mentions freedom of the press, because it's important. We have to keep the government in check, and to the people we're trying to keep in check, that's a huge threat. And there's never really been this type of crowdsourced, intellectual, deep research. I mean, when I don't know if, you know, if there was like a certain tipping point when they realized that this guy's going to be a problem, and it may have been when you got with Charles. I don't know. When you started getting into this stuff, and we got to wrap up, but had you already had the show with Charles, and Charles was already looking into the Hillary Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, and all that? Well, so when you went to England,
need to do.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to figure out. Did they already realize that
trip to England? It's interesting. That trip to England almost terminated the relationship with Charles before it ever happened, because, so again, George introduces me to Trish. Right. And Trish's whole thing is that she had been in the business world, and George used to say that she was a Harvard Business School graduate. She went to some like weekend seminar at Harvard and got a certificate. I've
done similar.
Whatever.
Stuff.
But, you know, so her whole thing was she was really interested in business, and so she wanted to get Charles Ortel on the show. And you know, when you get together with a couple of people and start to try to do a project or a whatever, people sort of start to naturally fall into roles that they're comfortable with, And Trish was very comfortable with me and George being like the crazy boys who are the main thrust behind this little startup thing that we're doing. And she's kind of like the maternal figure who keeps us under control and organizes everything. And she's going to call people and do this and that. So she was really kind of reaching out to Charles as Charles. I wasn't involved in setting up that first thing with Charles at all, just because it didn't occur to me. I mean, there were so many people and he just wasn't the first one who came to mind. And they said to me, how do you like the idea of having Charles Ortel on the show? And I said, great. How do you like the idea of having Robert David Steele on the show? Great, get whoever and get them on the show, and I'll keep doing what I'm doing, making videos and interview these people and whatever. And it was primarily going to be about, just sitting there and talking to Charles. And Charles reminded me that when we went to England, Trish had to call him to reschedule the interview. And he didn't like that. He felt that was unprofessional, that he was being rescheduled, and that his initial thought was he's never going to talk to us again. But then he said, well, let me not be like that, and agreed to go to the interview. But the point is, George set that up. And at that interview, when we were all in position, right before the interview began, Shane Harris calls. Now, maybe that's all a coincidence, but when four people are sitting around a table getting ready for an interview and I'm crapping around with all the cameras in the way that you described in Thailand, every one of those people are on their phones, texting, looking at the news, doing whatever. And if George is texting, Shane Harris or some intermediary saying, okay, Ortel is in position, call him now. We're about to start the interview. Then he gets called. Now, Charles is asked, hey, what's your name doing on this document that says that Peter Smith was raising money to buy 33,000 stolen emails? And Charles says, what are you talking about? I've never seen that document. And then the whole Peter Smith thing is off to the races. But remember, that phone call from Shane Harris was an improvised. That's when our script that was written in the air-conditioned room doesn't play out so well. Like, you see, these intelligence operations, I've seen a similarity between movie making, engaging in lawsuits, and engaging in military or intelligence operations. And what I mean by that is, the first step in making a movie is having an idea. Wouldn't it be interesting if a guy traveled back in time and then his own mother fell in love with him? Isn't that a weird and intriguing idea for a movie? That could go in a million different directions. A tragic Oedipus story, or magic takes him back in time. But setting it in 1985 with a kid in a DeLorean and all of that sort of stuff, that takes such a talented mind to take that intriguing idea and turn it into not only a compelling and entertaining script, but one that has so many complicated interconnections that work together in a sensible way. It's like designing a lawsuit or a military intelligence operation. You start out with the script, but then things happen once you start rolling that change the final outcome. And I think they do that a lot. But again, I'm on a huge ranting tangent here.
Well, it's fascinating because now we get to look into who is Shane Harris. We're going to get to look into who is Peter Smith. We're going to take, and look at that interaction, that phone call that happens as you guys are getting ready to record an episode. It's the first time you're meeting Charles Ortel.
Forgive me for interrupting, but the thought just returned. The reason why I raised all of that is because this is still active right now.
Right.
The people that did all that stuff did it not because they didn't want Trump to be president. It's true that they didn't want Trump to be president. But Lee Stranahan has said many, many times, Russiagate was not about Trump. It was about Russia. Because remember, when Obama ran for president and Mitt Romney said something about Russia, Obama said, the 1990s called, they want their foreign policy back. It was laughable that people would consider Russia a threat or an enemy or anything like that. The reason they didn't want Donald Trump to be president is that Donald Trump was saying we shouldn't be fighting with Russia.
Right.
We should form trade deals with them. And they're saying, no, no, no. We have this whole plan that we've been cooking for decades where we're going to invade Russia through Ukraine, balkanize the whole entire place, split it up into 5 new countries that are going to be controlled by these 5 guys who've been working with us on this plan. We're going to steal their natural gas resources. We're going to steal their oil resources. And that's the plan. We don't want Trump messing it up. So let's get this whole plan in play to screw him up and get him out of here. And as different things pop up, like Jason shows up and starts asking all these questions about Peter Smith, well, that's what happens when we show up on location, and this is our one and only day that we can access this location, and it's raining, and the whole day is supposed to be outside. The writer needs to come up with a very creative idea to make this work in some way, and if he succeeds, that scene fits into the movie, and we have a successful movie. If he fails, perhaps it's catastrophic, and without that scene, we can't complete this film.
I think it's wild. I think it's absolutely worth exploring deeper and deeper. So let's do a series on this, and let's look at who these characters are, because people don't understand who all these players are, what makes them important. You know, who are they? Where do they come from? And when you start to weave it together, you know, it takes a little time, but all of a sudden you start to realize, wait a second, how are these guys potentially connected to the judicial system? And because it's been 6 years of judicial harassment, in my perspective, and it's just wild. And so this really is the beginning of a rather complex web of social engineers and deep state actors, potentially. That's
Web of social engineering. That should be the title of the series.
All right. So let's you and I will turn this into a weekly session, and we'll get this thing in the books. Like you said, I probably won't be able to put this whole thing on YouTube, but for our patrons on Patreon and Subscribestar for the I Am John Cullen stuff, and for the people who follow you on Odyssey, and you're on Odyssey, you've got paid subscriptions on Twitter, you've got Rumble, you've got
no paid on Twitter. You got odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth,
right?
crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and subscribestar.com, and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth.
There you go. I don't have so many choices. I've got chocolate and vanilla. I got right. So you got Patreon, you got Subscribestar. There's no strawberry here, right? We don't do that, right? There's no pralines and cream. I don't do pralines and cream. We got chocolate.
But this is a good new series for us, John, and a good new format as well. And I think that this is something that a lot of people have gotten little drips and drabs of. But going through it like this, and even just sharing it with you, I think is going to make certain connections in people's minds that hopefully will help answer more questions.
Well, again, the lawfare has been sort of the dark cloud hanging over so much of our work that in some, some people have said, if it wasn't for all this lawfare, imagine if Jason could put all of his, law knowledge that you've had to going after Joe Lombardo, going after weasels, right?
Well, the ironic thing is
from these idiots.
The ironic thing is, I wouldn't have any of this knowledge if they hadn't done it. So
that's true too.
On the one hand, this has been an incredible struggle, very frustrating, very irritating, cost a lot of money, huge opportunity cost, losing that 120,000 strong Jason Goodman channel and the associated income.
But what they created, they did a wax on, wax off. Idiots.
That's right. I now have the
monster.
capability to defend myself quite competently in court, and I'm feeling good about that. I'm feeling good about the future. And we also want to reiterate for people watching this first episode of this web of social engineering show that we're putting together, the reason we're doing this right now is that the lawfare assault has entered a new phase. And earlier this week, as you mentioned at the top of the interview, Crowdsource the Truth 8 and Crowdsource the Truth 9 were kicked off despite having no pre-existing strikes. And that happened, I believe, because of an email that was sent from George Webb's brother, David, to lawyers for Google who have now been named in a new lawsuit that I was just served 2 weeks ago. And by sending this letter to Google's lawyers, I believe the Google lawyers perceived it as a threat. So they reacted. This was not a court deciding that Swigert is correct and this material should be taken down. This is just a legal letter and a threat Google, take this down or else, blah, blah, blah. And that's a much lower bar. So we want people to know that there's an active campaign that is increasing in its ferocity to try to stamp us out. So if you are able to become a sponsor of I Am John Cullen on subscribestar.com/I Am John Cullen, or patreon.com/I Am John Cullen, or Odyssey, Substack, Subscribestar, or Patreon for Crowdsource the Truth. We can't do this without you, and that's just a fact. So thanks to everybody who sponsors the show. And thank you to people.
Thank you for taking time to do all this, man. This is interesting. I think it's going to get very interesting as we start to peel it back to the next layer. We start to do
Absolutely.
a little, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. We're going to play 6 degrees of George Webb and find out. Wait a second. It's like this gets weird. So I think it's going to be very interesting. Thank you so much for taking time to do this. And for those of you who are subscribers of mine on Patreon or Subscribestar who don't yet support Jason's work, what the hell are you doing? Get over there. It's $5 a month. You can't buy anything for $5 anymore. Subscribe for $5 a month and watch what Jason's doing, because he has some of the most interesting things down in Washington, D.C., participating in some of these things happening in Congress. It's amazing to watch. So if you're not yet a patron, please join. Thanks so much, Jason, for joining. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, John.
And thanks for joining Hypothetically Speaking.
What you know about rolling down in the deep? When your brain goes numb, you can call a mental freeze. When these people talk too much, put that shit in slow motion, yeah. I feel like an astronaut in the ocean, yeah. What you know about rolling down in the deep? When your brain goes numb, you can call a mental freeze. When these people talk too much, put that shit in slow motion, yeah. I feel like an astronaut in the ocean. She says that I'm cool. I'm like, yeah, that's true. I believe in G.O.D. Don't believe in T.H.O.D. She keep playing me down. I'ma play her for fun. Don't really know my mental. Let me give you the picture like stencil. Falling down in the drought. No flow, rain was pouring down. See, that pain was all around. See, my mom was kinda loud. Didn't know which way to turn. Flow was cool, but I still felt burned. Energy up, you can feel my surge. I'ma kill everything like that.